Story 1. The most intense feeling was the day my little brother died by suicide. He was my closest sibling. I will remember that day for the rest of my life. I cried nonstop. It was the worst feeling ever. I hope nobody goes through this. Cherish your loved ones. When someone dies, nothing else seems to matter. You feel empty. Story 2. Giving birth to my child was like being filled with so much love, like helium, that I thought I would pop. It was the closest I could imagine to being painfully happy. Burying my child was like being forcefully deflated so that the world turned gray and I could not breathe. It felt as if the world had ended. Yet it kept turning and people kept living. The guilt of eating, breathing, or smiling when those are things my child can no longer do was unbearable. Story 3, maybe heartbreak. It is so overwhelming that I have to dissociate from the feeling because it is too much for my body to contain. Story 4, grief. I have lost 2 of my children. It does not get better. Story 5. Seeing my mother in her coffin the day before her funeral. I have never cried like that before or since. Story 6. I grieved my miscarriages. Then I grieved my husband cheating on me while I was miscarrying and later while pregnant, and the loss of the life I had dreamed of and worked so hard to build. Story 7, traumatic grief. My partner was killed in an accident, and I had to identify his body. The sound that came out of me 4.5 years ago still haunts me when I zone out. It was the most out of control, animalistic, heartbreaking, bleeding sound of my soul leaving my body, loudly, in a hospital. There was nothing I could do to stop that sound. I am normally a small-framed, type A project manager who is Midwestern polite and would never have made that sound. The 2 years after that were hell, and the post-traumatic stress disorder and grief are something I would not wish on anyone. Story 8. I still grieve the loss of my father. Even after 12 years, the sadness feels like I lost him yesterday. Story 9. Extreme mood swings brought on by limerence and unrequited love. The rage, depression, anxiety, and shame were so intense that I felt completely tormented. I sought psychodynamic therapy twice a week to help. Story 10. When I saw my wife coming down the aisle at our wedding, with my friends and family there to witness it, I couldn't stop crying. We have been happily married for almost 20 years. Story 11. Flight for survival. The intensity of fear and the urge to flee in a life-threatening situation is probably the strongest feeling. It is as if the volume of emotion is turned up 100%. It is not a complex or deep experience. It is impossible to ignore or manage and must be acted upon. Story 12, grief. Receiving a phone call that my brother had died by suicide broke me. Story 13, pain. My right cheek was torn when I fell while catching a cricket ball. My leg caught on a pole and I fell forward. Thankfully, my eye was uninjured. A small piece of gravel entered the wound. It was a freak accident. It was winter and the pain was unbearable. I could not even eat rice without pain. Now I have a scar on my right cheek. I also have a scar on my left cheek from cystic acne, so they match, which is nice. Story 14. Everything that comes with trying to break a trauma bond. Story 15. I am grieving after putting my dog down in June. This is the first time I have had to go through this. I have experienced many family deaths, including an aunt who died suddenly in September 2024, and an uncle who died of colon cancer in December 2024. Nothing I have felt compares to the grief of losing Zeus when he went into heart failure for the second time. Story 16. When I was 6, a freak accident left me with third-degree burns on both feet. Fortunately, I was barefoot. Any shoes or socks would have fused to my skin and made matters much worse. I remember how intense the pain was. I know how amazing complete joy feels, but nothing will come as close as my burns. Story 17. Pain of infidelity 6 months after marrying the man I thought was the love of my life and the father of my child. It hurt like nothing I had ever felt before. I have experienced other pain, such as the loss of my mother and father, but that one surpassed them all. Story 18. I used to think it was grief, but lately the hate I feel for the president and his administration has overtaken that grief. I don't mean to get political, but this feeling has been consuming me for the past few months. In the last few weeks, it has intensified. Story 19, Rage. I am not an angry person. I would like to make that abundantly clear. A specific event happened, and it was strange and unsettling to take a back seat to an emotion. It seemed like a fever. I genuinely felt sick. Story 20. I had a psychotic break once, and the fear and paranoia are something I will never forget. Story 21. I was a submariner in the Navy for nearly a decade. On every dive, as the ship pitched into a downward angle, there was a moment when you had to make peace with whatever God you believe in. In those moments, I discovered the deepest knowing of myself, what I cared about, and what was in my soul. Story 22. Sadness. Being left out. Feeling alone and disappointed. Story 23. Love. 7 weeks in a haze, the first time admitting that such a movie trope actually exists. Heartbreak. 22 weeks feeling like a wreck when she cheated on me. Friends and family all recognized that I have fundamentally changed over the past months. Most do not know why. Now I show my affection but do not give my heart. I do not have one anymore. Story 24. Heartbreak after 10 years together. I experienced severe anxiety and had to be hospitalized on heavy medications that did not help. I had not slept for a week, and the anxiety went through the roof. My emotional stability depended on my ex-partner and a friend, and I lost both at the same time. I was also experiencing a mild burnout from my job. It was the hardest year of my life so far. Story 25. The most intense feeling I have ever had was wonder when I heard the name of my first foster placement. When my ex and I first talked about having children, we considered many names. For a girl, it would be Vivian Elaine or Catherine Elizabeth. For a boy, we had not decided. Then we learned we could not have biological children without expensive medical assistance. So we became foster parents and waited. We got a call from our case manager. She asked if we were interested in taking in an abandoned infant from another county. We said yes and drove up to meet the team caring for the baby. After the meeting, we went to the group home where the baby was staying. On the way there, my ex was talking to the case manager on the phone. At one point, she dropped the phone as she stared out the windshield. I asked if she was okay. She slowly looked at me and said, "The baby is a girl and her name is Vivian Elizabeth." I looked back at the road and felt tingles run up and down my body. I had never felt such a sense of wonder and possibility in my life. Story 26. When the timing belt on my 2001 Civic snapped while I was driving 75 miles per hour on the freeway, I knew immediately what the damage would be. Story 27. I feel like panic attacks have slowly torn pieces from my soul. Story 28. I experienced physical pain during labor because my daughter was obstructed, and I was induced to speed up the delivery. I was 29 years old and at the airport waiting for a flight home to see my sick grandfather when my father called to tell me that my grandfather had just died. Story 29. The loss of a loved one and a breakup with someone I was truly in love with felt about the same. Story 30. Pain and loss. I cried for days in the shower to hide my tears. I used self-harm to feel something other than emptiness. I told lies to people I had never met. I had many online friends and did it to make them panic so I would feel someone cared. This was over 10 years ago, but the pain I caused myself and others still hurts. Story 31. Epiphany. I do not mean the little eureka, light bulb moment when you suddenly figure something out. I am talking about a massive tectonic shift in perspective that rewrote my entire worldview from the ground up. It made me someone most people describe as very low energy, manic for a week. I slept about 6 hours over 6 days. I was so wrapped up in everything being new, shiny, and amazing. It was like one of the shots of our videos, where everything is intense, bright, and packed to the brim with an onrushing tide of earth-shattering insights. Ultimately, I described it as a state of pure beauty brought on by my newfound proximity to the truth, infusing my life with meaning. It was a hell of a ride, but one of the saddest things I have ever experienced was realizing it was fading and that life would return to normal. I kept the new insights, and they did reinvent large portions of my life. For example, I stopped being an atheist after about 30 years. Even years later, I still miss the feeling of being so completely hardwired into that intensity all the time. Story 32. Fear. When I was 17, I worked in a grocery store. One night, two men came in dressed in camouflage and gas masks, carrying sawed-off shotguns. I will never forget being face down on the floor, with one of them standing over me while the other was in the manager's loft when a gun went off. I did not know if the manager had been shot. Thankfully, when they ran out, we found out that she was okay. He had just shot the wall and ceiling to scare everyone. It has been nearly 30 years, and it still sticks with me. Story 33. Primal rage at a personal injustice and a subsequent buildup of ancestral fury whenever I see or hear stories of similar injustices. Story 34. I experienced grief during the 30 to 40 minutes after life support was turned off for my father and before he died. Story 35. From the moment my son was diagnosed with leukemia until his passing, the pain has lingered. I would not wish this on my worst enemy. Story 36. Grief. It's the only emotion we inherit later on. We have to make room for it beside our other feelings. It sits beside them, invading. Story 37. I lost a parent 7 years ago. I never cried or showed outward grief, but I go to a Christmas service at York Minster every year and sit there and sob uncontrollably throughout the service. I'm sure this is how my grief manifests itself. Story 38. I feel pain from the betrayal by my narcissistic mother and my felonious narcissistic sister, who colluded with my abusive ex. I nearly ended my life because she scoffed and said, "He's dead now, so it doesn't matter." No apologies. Not one. I have never cried with such grief except when my boyfriend from a previous relationship ghosted me, saying he was going back to fight in Afghanistan. He had served 5 tours. He was in New Orleans the entire time when I ran into him with one of my best friends. I thought he was a casualty. I was devastated by the lies and betrayals. Note: they are not worth taking your last breath for if they did not care about your well-being from the start. We are all better than their lies. Story 39. I experienced catharsis over the deaths of my father and grandmother while using mushrooms and hemp during the Day of the Dead this year. We sat around a campfire as people shared their grief in a circle, sang, and a sound bath played. I cried a lot and have felt refreshed ever since. Story 40. I felt sadness after my divorce, betrayal, and the loss of a confidant and best friend. A year later, I am doing much better. Story 41. Kamaribi. I have experienced it only once in waking life, and I find myself continually drawn back to the moment and the person involved. Otherwise, I feel that intense euphoria and peace only in my lucid dreams. To add, Kamaribi came from within me. Perhaps I have held onto that light the entire time. Story 42. On a much lighter note, sometimes music will hit just right and produce a feeling of euphoria so intense it makes me lightheaded. It usually requires the perfect conditions and genre, with a bit of maladaptive daydreaming thrown in, but if you can manage it, it is very fun. Story 43. It moved me. I had never been to the ballet. It was on my bucket list. We arrived and took our seats. 15 minutes in, I felt a strange, inexplicable sensation. Then it hit me. I was totally relaxed. I had never felt anything like it. Every bit of tension drained away. It was a great feeling. A few months later, I went to another performance just to see what would happen. It happened again. Story 44. A feeling of euphoria. It was midnight on a Saturday at the Roskilde Music Festival. It was our 7th day there, each one better than the last. That day had been legendary. I had lost my voice from laughter. I looked around and was surrounded by 10 of my closest friends at a great concert. The beer was cold, the air still warm, and tears of joy began to trickle down my cheeks. That moment had not been matched since. When I became a dad, I cried larger tears of joy, but it was a different kind of joy. Story 45. My head is always a confusing soup of emotions and many nerves, so it hits me more deeply when I do not feel anything. I have had a couple of really awful arguments with partners in the past. On both occasions I felt a dreadful, cavernous emptiness. like a bag in which anything placed simply ceases to exist. On the other hand, I remember going to bed anxious about something one night, the kind of anxiety that feels like someone is pressing a thumb against your forehead and will not take it off. Suddenly, for maybe 5 minutes, the anxiety blinked out of existence and was replaced by an almost unnatural calmness and warmth. I had not a single thought in my head, and it was blissful. It was early in my relationship with my wife, and she has been nothing but a blessing. Maybe those few unexplained moments of calm were some kind of external confirmation. Story 46. It's tough to pick. I lost a child, and that crushed me. Years later, even the thought of trying again would make me break down in tears. I watched the man I loved marry another woman, and it felt like my heart was being crushed. I also held my daughter after 14 hours of labor and cried with overwhelming, joyful relief that she was, and thank God still is, okay. Story 47. Grief at my father's death. I know it feels a bit different for everyone, but I experienced it as a profound sadness. Story 48. It's the agony of defeat. I would much rather feel anything than lose something I have worked so hard for. Story 49. I felt fear when I saw a hand waving at me from the end of the bed. My whole body writhed in shock, as if I were trapped in a jump scare. Story 50. Seeing my child born was overwhelming. The immensity of creating a life and having responsibility for it was profound. Even with 9 months to prepare, it still hit me. Story 51. 2 people stole my Pokemon cards last year. I still hate them and will feel this way until I die or until I find them. Story 52. When you tell someone you're attracted to them and they say they are too. Story 53. My brother is dead. I remember sitting on the carpet, the plastic on my phone cracking as I squeezed it, feeling a sandbag on my chest. He was murdered the previous night. No emotion hit me yet, but the numb, empty screen in my mind was the worst because I knew what would follow. It felt like someone counting down before snapping a bone back into place. Story 54. Finding out that my mother has Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia has broken my heart. I work in a care home on a dementia unit and see every day what lies ahead for her. Dementia is such a cruel disease. Story 55. Walking home from school as a child, I passed an unused rural laneway that ran through an old wooded quarry and an entryway for the rail cars that once ran underground to carry loads in and out. I went inside and lived there for 25 years. The feeling I had was overwhelming. A universal truth, it seemed, is that children yearn for the minds. Story 56. Probably the intense shock when I broke my arm, seeing it bent in such an unnatural way, caused the world to freeze. Story 57. Cutting off a narcissistic family member brings profound grief. Coming to terms with the truth and realizing that the person you thought they were never existed, and that everything you grew up with was based on lies, is painful. It is a long, depressing, and emotionally draining process toward true healing and peace. Story 58. Jealousy did it for me. Seeing my ex-partner with the man she had cheated on me with broke me and filled me with a fury I did not know existed. Probably says something about me, but that was it. Story 59. I was napping on the floor. I had fallen asleep while watching television. He grew up in a big family, so sitting on the floor with a pillow and blanket was normal. I was sound asleep and dreaming about hiking when my 400-pound husband fell and landed rear first on my knees, which were stacked because I was sleeping on my side. I woke up thinking a bear was attacking. The combined fear, pain, and confusion were overwhelming. He said he had never heard a scream like that and later had nightmares because of it. Story 60. Hate and euphoria at the same time. I was psychotic and deluded myself into thinking I was an angel talking to God, and he was giving me a pass to be karma personified. Story 61. I once broke my arm, but not completely. The doctor had my father lie on top of me to hold me down while he grabbed my partially broken arm and broke it fully. Story 62. The day my first son was born was filled with a love I did not know was possible. Story 63. My 2-year-old is in the hospital, and I am unsure what will happen. That fear is unlike anything else, except perhaps the grief of losing a child. It is intense. Story 64. I hate my mother. I have never wanted to kill anyone, but if I ever had to, she would be the one. Growing up, I wished I would receive a call saying she had been in a car accident and had died. Story 65. Grief. There have been several points in my life where the pain of loss has made me contemplate leaving myself. It is the worst kind of pain. I'm sorry you feel this way. If you are thinking about harming yourself or are in immediate danger, please call your local emergency number right now or contact a crisis line. In the United States, you can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you are elsewhere, please contact your local emergency services or a trusted person who can help. If you would like, I can help you find resources or talk about what you are feeling. Story 66. I experienced terror from a hallucination during sleep paralysis. My doctor had prescribed trazodone for insomnia, and the first night I took it, it knocked me out. I could not move. My muscles were completely unresponsive. I woke up in the morning unable to move and saw a demon sitting on my chest. I screamed in terror, but the paralysis prevented me from making any real sound. The demon kept turning its head like a confused dog and reached toward me. It just would not end. When I finally regained control and the demon disappeared, I threw out the trazodone and told my doctor I would never take it again. I have experienced intense things before, but the terror that morning was unlike anything I had known. I did not know I could feel that afraid. Story 67. Heartbreak. I can't even talk about what happened. The last time I did, I was hospitalized. My body just can't handle it. Story 68. Grief like a singularity. So massive and heavy that it collapsed the fabric of the self-spacetime. Somatically, my body couldn't help but curl inward, hunching under the pull of that grief like a dead spider on its back. Fear, hopelessness, humiliation, and cruelty all came with it, from many profoundly influential sources at once. I thought I knew sadness before, but nothing compared to that moment. Story 69. I carried guilt until a few weeks ago. Due to my upbringing and the violence and sexual assaults I experienced, I always felt a deep sense of guilt. And because of that, I never allowed myself to experience many things most people get to, such as relationships, love, healthy friendships, education, and more. I am 35 now, and I know this might seem odd, but most days I am in a peaceful, happy place. It is amazing how much guilt can hold you back. Story 70. Despair. Several years ago, a mentally abusive, decades-long relationship imploded in one of those "how utterly stupid was she?" ways that end up in a Dear John anthology. When it abruptly, and I mean it ended within hours, I suddenly found myself alone, in debt overnight, and heartbroken. I had under $100 and only 2 pieces of furniture. The apartment we had shared for years became a solo unit. Years of narcissistic entanglement left me with zero self-esteem, crippling fear, no liquid cash, and the discovery of a double life he had led right under my nose. When you have been warped into believing you are incapable of living alone and worthless, and you suddenly have no cash and almost $40,000 in freshly minted credit card debt, alone, with friends long since alienated because of "you all just don't know him like I do," there is a level of despair about what happened and how it happened. It was a very tough period when I wanted things I was convinced I could never be, do, or have. Story 71. Poison sumac on my hip and lower back. It was rubbed and irritated all day during winter a few years ago. A scalding hot shower hitting it gave me a feeling of euphoria and ecstasy I had never felt before. Story 72. For me, it was rage. I experienced trauma intense enough that I started screaming and could not stop. Whenever I opened my mouth, scream after scream came out. The feeling was partly dissociative. I was present, but not as fully present as I was while experiencing the rage. I tend to repress my anger because I was raised around very vulnerable people, so I temper my feelings in a controlled way. After my dad died, I flew across the country to help sort his things. My uncle would not let me or my family stay at the family house. My family trusted me to be the one who was calm and in control, and I maintained that in my interactions with him until we arrived. I discovered that he would not let us stay in the house, would not even let us into the house, would not give me the paperwork my dad had set aside for his death, and would not even bring a broom to help with cleanup. I completely lost it. I felt heat rising in me, pushing its way out of the top of my head. When it reached my mouth, there was no going back. I let him have it. I was very cruel and had no regrets. I have been writing a memoir about my family, so I have a lot of experience digging into these feelings and re-experiencing them as the words come out. When I read the passage where I blew up at my uncle, those emotions rise again every time. I get furious just thinking about that situation. Reading the chapter feels gratifying because it is one of the few times in my life when I truly let that rage go. Story 73. Grief. When my brother died by suicide, I found out at exactly 4:46 a.m. Even now, every time the clock reaches that time, I remember how happy we were growing up together. Story 74. The protective instinct I felt the second my daughter was born is something I'll never forget. I had zero thought of attachment until she came out and the nurses took her to be weighed, and I instantly thought, don't hurt my fucking kid. It reinforced that men deal with pregnancy and childbirth differently. Even now that they're older, if I hear about one of them getting bullied, my first instinct is to go beat up the other kid. Story 75. Other than the grief of a loved one, discovering that my now ex-husband was cheating deflated me in a way I could never imagine. Sad, angry, heartbroken, and confused summed it up. I was shaking so badly. Story 76. Giving birth moved from pain to love to exhaustion to everything, all intensely. Story 77. The fear of a panic attack is like nothing else. It is your brain's fear system running at full power. It does not matter if you know you are safe or that you are being irrational. Nothing overrides the panic. It is so intense it hurts. I cry and clutch my chest, feeling a sense of impending doom, as if I am facing my death. Afterwards, I feel foolish. Everything is fine and I know it, but seconds earlier I was genuinely panicking for my life. Story 78. I had just contracted coronavirus disease 2019 and was stuck at home. I had a gut feeling the night before. The next morning my aunt called and told me my grandfather had died. He was 41 years old. The feeling I had when she told me, which I can feel even now faintly, was overwhelming. I let out the most intense cry. It felt as if part of my soul had left my body. That was the first time I truly felt emptiness. I never got to say goodbye. Story 79. The first time I smoked meth, I thought I was in love with everything and everyone. The feeling was so intense I chased it for a few years. Thank God I'm off that. Story 80. Love. When I had my children, I felt a love so deep I did not know it could be that way. I still look at them every single day and feel it. Story 81. Grief, especially when it is fresh, is the most intense, debilitating feeling I have ever experienced. It is the desperation you feel when you are longing for their warmth and voice. Story 82. The moment I understood that happiness and sadness can exist together, and that you can miss something deeply yet still feel grateful it happened. Story 83. Probably fear and anxiety from my obsessive-compulsive disorder. I was convinced everything was trying to kill me or that I was accidentally killing people. I thought I had contracted rabies and that I had drowned my cat, among other fears. None of these things were happening, but I was completely distraught about them. I was on the verge of suicide before starting Prozac. Story 84. There were two. 1. Calm and peace. Long story short, about 10 years ago I decided to end my life, and I am so glad I did not. Right after making that decision and before following through, all my worries went away. I did not care about anything. That calm and peace is what actually stopped me. 10 out of 10, but I would definitely not recommend that route to calm and peace. 2. This one seems out there, but I had the feeling of letting go while I was meditating. It felt like going down a waterslide and letting it take me on an adventure. I experienced the joy of the ride until it ended with a big splash. It was like a mental ride, but once I realized I was on it, it stopped. I came out of the experience the happiest I have ever been. I do not think it was enlightenment per se, but I am glad I experienced that feeling. Part of me wishes to experience it again, but I do not meditate to seek it. Story 85. Grief, the utter feeling of despair I felt when I saw my beloved in his casket at his funeral. I understood why some people go mad with grief when they see a loved one like that. I felt my psyche break. I was 14 when it happened. I would have buried myself with him. I tried to open the casket. I just wanted to kiss and embrace him again and never let go. When my first beloved died, he was cremated. Seeing his urn was unbearable. I know it is a natural part of death, but I cannot understand how a whole man you loved with all you are can end up so small, literally just a small bag of ashes. The other feeling was the sense of impending doom when I had heart dysfunction at 16 as I was dying from sepsis. There is nothing more horrifying than that sense of impending doom. I understood the kind of horror Lovecraft wrote about. Felt like that. I started screaming until my vocal cords hurt. It was horrific. The third feeling was seeing my second beloved's grave. I am afraid to go there even though I want to. I sent him flowers, but I have not dared to go, even though I must. I still cannot comprehend how such a beautiful man has a small gravestone. When I saw it for the first time, it was like being stabbed 1,000 times. I know our souls are what matter, that when you die only the body remains, but it still hurts to know that someone who lived and had a beating heart and gave so much joy ends up so small that 2 or 4 people can carry them. It hurts that someone who was your life can be laid to rest so easily. I think we forget that we are mortal and fragile. The fourth is the everyday grief, as so many have described. You cry and scream in pain every day, every hour, for months, and you have to accept that you must go on because there is no other choice, but you must do it without them. I believe in God and an afterlife, but the idea that it does not exist makes me cry in horror. I have experienced paranormal things, but I still fear they might not be real and there is no way to know for sure. They felt as real as anything I have experienced, but I fear I won't know until my death. It is unbearable. So many souls who have ever existed, so many people you cherished, and then they are gone, whether their lives were filled with misery or joy. I know it might be a selfish thought, but if there is nothing after death, I hope at least that my brain will release 3,4-methylenedioxymethamphetamine, commonly called ecstasy or something like it, so I can see them again as if they were flesh and bone one last time. I want one final dream in which I live with them without pain or sorrow, to see and kiss them, and if life is a dream, to dream with them forever. I think I will never be truly happy again. I want to live the best life I can and make my existence bring joy to others. I want to write and make art and do what I must. But I know I will never be happy again. Story 86. Grief after my son was stillborn due to a placental abruption. Story 87. Grief. After some time, you begin to live again. Every once in a while, you remember they are gone, and suddenly you are overcome with intense emotion. Story 88. Acceptance. 2021 was a rough year for me. I lost my brother, almost lost my wife to suicide. I still have scars on my arms from wrestling the knife away from her. And I was trapped in an abusive work environment that demanded 10 to 13 hours a day for as long as 3 straight weeks, including weekends, with a manager who regularly insulted and belittled me. All of that stress, grief, and abuse festered, and I was deeply mentally unwell. One weekend I took 300 micrograms of lysergic acid diethylamide, walked out into the woods, and sat in silence for 4 hours. All of the emotions I had been bottling up to survive boiled violently to the surface. At first it was a purely hellish experience. I gripped my wife's hand and sobbed for what felt like an eternity. At the peak I found myself emotionally exhausted, too weak to hurt anymore. In that moment, I was totally at peace with everything that had happened and everything that would ever happen to me. I had no choice but to accept my pain, and once I stopped fighting, it flowed through me and disappeared. I felt ready to die, not in a bad way but in a vulnerable way, as if it were safe to completely let go. It was okay. Everything would be okay. Complete acceptance. The remainder of the trip was relatively unremarkable. Pretty colors and wiggly outlines. The change in my mental health was immediate. I am in a much better place now, and I do not know if I could have healed as profoundly without that experience. Story 89. The birth of my first child and the subsequent few days. I was 17 when I had her. The labor lasted 3 full days, and by the time she was born, I was exhausted. A nurse would not let me touch her, and the rage that rose in me was profound. When we finally had some alone time, I was astonished at the depth of feeling I had for her. I spent the first couple of days just watching her. I know it seems cliché, but at the time I had never experienced any feeling that intense. I think it might have been a form of shock, my brain's way of easing me into it. Story 90: Heartbreak. My ex-partner of 2 years, who was my best friend, told me they had no love for me on my way to work. I had to fight everything in my body not to merge into oncoming traffic. Story 91: Helplessness. Some things in life are beyond your control and you cannot do anything about them. They may be something you cannot share with anyone, or you could try, but people might not understand. Story 92: I feared not being chosen as student council president because my opponent was such a clown. If I had failed, it would have been a tragedy for me and for the 8 people who supported me. It wasn't only about me, but about many others. Story 93: The fear is that the memory itself is mostly blocked out, but the few times it has come up, I feel like I am going to pass out. Story 94: A three-way tie. Grief. This one is self-explanatory. Lying in an empty bed after having someone beside you every night for years left a deep, dark pit of despair. Anxiety attack. The feeling is like horror movie violins screaming at you. The worst was after taking an edible and spending several hours in mental agony because every thought and physical sensation triggered panic. Anger. I have an explosive anger disorder. When it is triggered, the anger is so overwhelming and all-consuming that I cannot think or speak clearly. Seeing red is barely a metaphor. Story 95: I was not prepared for the visceral intensity of limerence. Oh my God. I don't think I've had worse anxiety in my 50 years of life. There was constant tightness in my chest, sobbing, shaking, feeling completely unhinged and begging the universe to make it stop. I never want to go through that again. Story 96: Emotional emptiness. I do not feel anything. Grief and sadness are a mystery to me. Story 97: After moving out, I got a Shiba Husky mix who loved to run. They tore the equivalent of an Achilles tendon and had to have surgery. They had a bad reaction to the anesthesia and were declared brain dead. They were going to turn 2 in a few days. I did not know I could cry like that. Story 98: Betrayal and rage toward my brother and father during a road trip. Story 99: I would say it was one of two things. Either it was sadness or pain 4 years ago when my first ever crush denied me after I asked her out, which resulted in my feeling nothing, no joy, love, peace, or anything. Or it was the feeling of pure joy and happiness from becoming friends with a coworker during the last 2 to 3 weeks. I finally feel all those things again, which I lost so many years ago. Story 100: I hear people clap their hands, not for me, but just because. Story 101: Hate. People say it fades, but in my experience, when someone truly hurts you to your core, you can hold on to that hate for a very long time. When it set in, I felt it in every part of my body, laser focused on that one person. It never fully went away. Every time I was near them or heard about them, it put me on edge. It made me feel sick and constantly unhappy. I learned to let go of hate and never let myself be consumed by it again because it was a form of self-harm, and I now know to treat myself better. Story 102: Mania. Everything feels like it is trying to kill you, and you want to do whatever it will take to make it stop and to feel that someone or something loves you again. In my case, that often felt violent and angry. I did not realize it was more than grief until I started medication and seemed to improve very quickly. Story 103: The feeling that overcame me as I was with my grandpa when he took his last breath was the most extraordinary experience. Peaceful does not begin to describe how it felt. Story 104: The heartbreak from the end of my relationship with my ex-girlfriend utterly destroyed me emotionally for a long time. Nearly 40 years have passed, and it still plays on my mind. It has made me emotionally harder. I have lost both parents since, but neither loss cut as deeply, and I am embarrassed and ashamed to say that. Story 105: My cousin and I had a falling out, and it was the only time I have ever been heartbroken. Not a single ex affected me that way. We have since made up and are very close. Story 106. It's embarrassing, but probably jealousy. A guy told me in class he was now together with the girl I had been desperately in love with for years. I had never had a physical reaction to information alone. I rushed to the restroom and vomited. God blessed me by not having to lose someone unexpectedly. Story 107. Mania and psychosis. The feeling of every neuron firing at 1000% and your heart beating a mile a minute is terrifying. Story 108. When my first daughter was born, I felt an indescribable, overwhelming sense of pure, unconditional love. Sounds cliché, but it is true. Story 109. Fear. Raw, visceral fear of realizing that none of it will go as planned. You will die right here with no grandeur or ceremonious climax. You may be a headline the next morning, and you have so much left to say. Story 110. For me, it was that gut drop feeling of losing something I never thought I would lose. Story 111. I experienced heartbreak when my dog was taken from me and euthanized for no reason in Colorado. Story 112. Love. I loved my ex-wife, but I never knew its true power until I met my now fiancé at age 45. Story 113. For me, it was that strange mix of hope and fear that hit at the same time. Story 114. I never knew determination until I left my ex. I did not know I had the strength to refuse someone so clearly. Nothing he could do would change my mind short of holding a gun to my head. And even then, a friend was on a safety call when my ex showed up to beg me to come back. The friend reminded me that I had already said no. Sometimes I forget how much easier the hardest choice of my life became once I had space from him. It is encouraging to remember. Story 115. I feel resentment because of the way I was treated when I was with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Story 116. I felt pure euphoria during my first experience with the drug 3,4-methylenedioxymethamphetamine. I felt like I was high-fiving God, and I am not really a believer. I felt sadness and panic terror when I was told that my cat had started dying in the next room. Then I saw him crawl to me, struggling to breathe, with his little face open as I tried to pet him one last time. Just typing this makes me cry. It happened 6 months ago. Story 117. I did not recognize myself in the mirror during a mental crisis. It lasted one day. It was intense, and reality felt unbearable in that moment. Story 118. I was filled with rage after leaving an abusive relationship. When the rose-tinted glasses came off and I could see what had happened, I was very angry. Then she lied to the police about me, so I pressed charges. Story 119. Shock and stress. When you are violently yelled at and insulted and you cannot escape, the only option is to endure. The brain freezes. You are attacked and there is no room for fear or anxiety. The menace is already present. Story 120. I felt intense emotions constantly throughout my life. Ironically, the most intense thing I experienced was numbness. It felt like my life suddenly hit rock bottom and became completely chaotic. Yet I just kept moving. My executive function seemed unusually active because I was not thinking. My body operated on anxious autopilot. I did not stop to feel anything. The events did not hit me until months later, when I allowed myself to think about them and began to grieve. I talked a lot then and felt manic. My body was anxious, but my mind was not. Even though I felt almost nothing, I cannot remember what I said while talking nonstop. Story 121. Hatred and contempt occur when you stop seeing the other person as a human. It is unpleasant, yet in the moment you may feel very passionate and righteous. Story 122. I took a heroic dose of psilocybin and experienced every human emotion at once, leaving me in tears, shock, and awe. I now understand humanity and have a reverence for the duality of emotions. Story 123. I am grateful for love. Love is a very strong feeling. It saves and protects you and always makes you feel good. I have fallen in love only once in my life, and it was the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me. Love in all its forms is what we need most as human beings. Story 124. I lay on the ground as my ex-partner kicked me in the head and back. I thought I was going to die and never see my son again. I took him back because trauma bonds are strong, and whenever he became intimate with me, I had flashbacks. I finally got out, but I still wake up in the middle of the night after reliving it in my dreams. I felt terror, fear, and disbelief. I will never forget it as long as I live. Story 125. Grief. Holy shit, it sucks and manifests differently for everyone. Story 126. Sadness. The 1980s were not kind to me. Love was absent. Story 127. I would have to say grief when my mother died. I was her caregiver for several years while working full-time. When she died, I missed her, but I did not miss getting up at 5 a.m. to check her blood sugar and give her insulin. I also helped her with other tasks because of her limited eyesight. I had never understood being heartbroken, but I was. When I came home from work and sobbed, I felt a pain in my chest. I did this for about 2 weeks and knew I needed help, which I received from hospice. One thing we did was hold a celebration of life for my mother. It was very therapeutic, and for the first time in about a month I felt joy as I shared stories about her and listened to others express interest. We focused on her life rather than her illness. Some people in the group who had lost husbands found this harder. Story 128. Having my soul stolen and then being passed around for years. My mother's deep hatred for me since before I was born. All the abuse I've experienced or seen since I was born really messed me up and made me unable to function as an adult. Because of it, my children have suffered from the effects of my childhood abuse. I gave 2 of my children up for adoption while keeping my older 2. No one ever saved me from the abuse or cared enough to remove me and get me help early, so I might have had a successful future or been able to follow my dreams. My dreams died by the end of 8th grade because I became pregnant by a foreign pedophile in his 20s who did not speak English. My mother gave me to him as if I were not a human being, and instead of protecting me, she protected him at all costs. I nearly died from blood loss after I gave birth to my son at age 15, 2 weeks after his birth, on New Year's in 2008, because my small body could not handle childbirth. I was never loved by my parents or anyone else except my aunt, who died of cancer when I was 10. Last but not least, I watched the only mother I had die from cancer. I went to her chemotherapy treatments and doctor's appointments and watched the cancer destroy the one person who cared for, loved, and protected me, and I could not do anything to stop it. I could not stop the sexual abuse because I did not understand what was happening, nor did I know the name for it to be able to tell anyone. By the time I did, my mother started telling me I was a whore and that I wanted it. She said it was not rape. That rape was when a man beats you half to death and rips your clothes off like in the movies, and that I was the predator, sick, and the problem. No one but my aunt cared or loved me. I have been alone since she died, and it has never gotten better. That is just a lie they tell you so you will not commit suicide, because God forbid you want to be free of pain, suffering, abuse, and rape. Story 129. Love. Oof, that shit can chew you up and spit you out right now. But also, damn, it's a high. Story 130. I was going to say confusion or hopelessness, but it is really longing to escape my confusion and sense of hopelessness. For many decades, people have told me 2 different things. They say I believe one thing, insist I believe the other, then tell me I used to believe the first and call that belief stupid, asking why I would ever think that. It goes back and forth so much that I do not know what reality is. I cannot tell lies from truth. I am always second-guessing myself and wondering if it is just me. I question whether anything has a consistent meaning, whether yes and no always mean the same thing, and whether anything matters, even when it seems to matter if I try to align with others. I feel like I am always wrong, even when someone else says the same thing moments later and everyone agrees. It is not just friends and family. I do not know if I have bad luck, bad charisma, or something else, but I am lost and won out. I have no confidence in myself to ever get out of this. I have no trust or hope in others because it keeps happening. I yearn amid negative thoughts. I long for a way out. Story 131. Rage was complete in intensity and unholy in its expression. There were children involved. I would prefer not to say more. Story 132. The top comment was about grief that had been bottled up. It hits much harder. When I finally let it out, I literally lost the ability to speak temporarily for a week or two. Even after that, I could not say letters like I or S. To this day, my vocabulary still lacks the letter I where it should be. Mostly, it sounds like am instead of I am. Story 133. Euphoria, not substance-induced. In my early 20s, I would experience intense episodes of elation that lasted for hours. I could not stop smiling to the point where it hurt. I would laugh at everything and feel a deep adoration for life and the earth. It rarely happens now, but it was an extremely intense emotional state. Story 134. Aggravated armed robbery. A full freeze, fight, flight, then flop response. The flop was the part that stuck. Story 135. Anger for letting people step on me repeatedly. Anger and pity for myself after years of not speaking up. I hated myself when I realized I did not treat myself any better. It was the worst feeling and lasted more than 2 weeks. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.